I'm Pat Robertson. Welcome to this special program, Life Beyond the Grave. You're about to meet real people who have faced life's ultimate question, where will I spend eternity? They will share their firsthand experiences of life after death, hoping to help you find the answers you've been looking for. Some of them come with a message of joy and peace, others with a frightening, urgent warning. All of them agree on this: heaven and hell are real, and each of us decides where we will live forever. I'd like to introduce you to Colton Burpo. This young boy loved the time he spent with his great-grandfather and baby sister, two people he had never met on Earth.
How old are you today?
3.
And what is your name? And where do you live?
In Nebraska.
Who's your mommy?
Sonia.
Who's your daddy?
Daddy. Popo.
Who's your sister?
Taxi.
That was 8 years ago. Looking at Colton now, you would have never guessed that he almost died in 2003. His father, Todd, tells about Colton's near-death experience in the book, Heaven is for Real.
And he started throwing up into the toilet, and at first we're like, okay, he's got the stomach flu, because the doctor said it was going around.
Colton's condition only got worse as days passed. His doctor discovered his appendix had burst, and infection was spreading in his body. Time was running out.
And we knew we were in bad shape when they said, well, you need to come out to the hallway. They separated us from everyone else, and then someone came to us and started talking to us that we got to have surgery on your kid.
It was tough. Seeing your boy be lifeless when he was a very vibrant child.
And it was at that moment that we were looking at each other. I remember my wife holding Colton in that hallway, just us. He's not even moving. We went to the surgery prep area, and I remember them hauling him away and him just yelling at me, "Daddy, don't let him take me. Daddy, don't let him take me." And I went back to the pre-op room where we had left some stuff, and I was finally alone, shut the door, and I just broke down and I was mad at God. I just frustrated, fed up. And I remember telling him, I said, "God, after all I've done for you, and now you're going to take my kid? This is how you treat your pastors?"
And I was calling our prayer chain. I was calling anybody that would be on the other line to get Colton on the prayer chain because it was bad.
We were there in the waiting room for an hour and a half, maybe. Then I remember the nurse coming out. "Is Colton's daddy out here?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, Colton's in recovery and he's screaming for you." And I'm sitting there with him. And I remember my son in that room then looking up at me and goes, "Dad, do you know I almost died?" And my first thought was, maybe overheard the nurse say that, or maybe they thought he was under anesthesia, and he wasn't. But it wasn't till 4 months after we got out of the hospital that we finally listened to our son.
And that's where I got to see heaven. No, Jesus and some angels came and flew me up to heaven.
And I said, "So Colton, what did Jesus look like?"
I knew that the first person I saw was Jesus. He was wearing white robes with a purple sash, and he just came down nicely and gracefully.
"Well, Dad, Jesus has markers. Dad, Jesus has markers." I didn't know what he meant, so I finally asked the right question. "Colton, where are Jesus' markers?" And he drops his toys down, he stands up, and he just points, "Dad, they were right here." He takes his fingers, points to the palms, then he bends over and touches the tops of his feet and looks up to me. "That's where Jesus' markers were, Dad."
When I was in the throne room of God to start with, so I got to see what that looked like. I was upset because I didn't know what was happening. What God did is he used people or things that I liked to calm me down. From there on, I felt better.
Then one day we're traveling together and he looks up at me and, "Dad, you used to have a grandpa named Pop, didn't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's really nice." "Really?" "Yeah, you used to play with him as a kid and fix..." work with him on the farm and shoot stuff with him? And I'm like, yeah, how do you know that? Well, he told me.
A figure came up, and he was Pop. He asked me, "Are you Todd's son?" I said yes. He said that he was his grandpa, so that's where I met him.
Yeah, Pop, I was very close to him. And he was my most significant male role model when I was a kid growing up. But he was killed in a car wreck before I turned 7.
I was busy paying bills again, because that's my job. And he came up and told me he had 2 sisters. Well, he had to say it several times before he finally got my attention. And finally, I put myself down and looked at him and says, "What do you mean you have 2 sisters?" "No, I have 2 sisters. You had a baby die in your tummy." And I just looked at him like, "Well, how do you know you have 2 sisters?" "Well, she told me." And then he proceeded to describe her.
She looked like Cassie, but she had brown hair. And first time when she saw me, she just came up and hugged me.
We knew this was true because he said, "She kept hugging me. She wouldn't stop hugging me, Mom," and I didn't like that.
Well, I'm not really the hugging type.
I had miscarried the weekend of Father's Day weekend, which made it even rougher. And we thought we'd dealt with it. We'd gotten over, we accepted that the baby had died. But when he said he had 2 sisters, I think I was in shock first and then trying to realize, what is he telling me? And so I knew that he had seen her, and after he described her, and he said, she's just waiting for you guys to come to heaven.
You know, as we talked about heaven and he was telling me all these wonderful details, I just felt like I had to ask him, did he want to come back?
I knew that I was leaving heaven because Jesus came to me and said, "Colton, you need to go back." Even though I didn't want to go back, he said that he was answering my dad's prayer.
I remember that prayer. That irreverent, that disrespectful, screaming at God prayer. I was like, he's answering that prayer?
Today, Colton is a healthy 11-year-old and shares his heavenly journey with boldness.
I learned that heaven is for real, and you're gonna like it.
Heaven is for real, and you're going to like it. What does the Bible tell us about heaven? You know, when Jesus was on the cross, there were 2 thieves on either side of him, and one made fun of him. The other one said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, this day, you will be with me in paradise." Paradise. Our minds haven't seen, we can't conceive of it, what paradise is like. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him." It is beyond anything you can comprehend. But the desire of all of our hearts is to be part of the resurrection and to live in paradise. Jeffrey Thompson describes it as the most beautiful thing he's ever seen, a place of peace beyond description. Well, that's quite a statement coming from a man whose out-of-control stress cost him his life.
Law practice is a stressful environment, and you're dealing with a lot of very difficult situations. I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach every morning, feeling that stress.
He just was burdened by work. I mean, it was always on his mind. You know, it was a hard thing for him to turn off on the weekends or to get away from it.
I was just focused so intently on my career that I was letting what's really important fall by the wayside.
Jeffrey Thompson's law practice didn't take just his time and energy. The fast pace and the constant stress also took a toll on his body.
I maintained that stress, and it continued to work on me, and it also continued to work on my body. And eventually it broke down. I began having stomach pains, severe stomach pains, that I initially just had no idea what it was. I thought I had an appendix rupture.
Jeffrey had developed diverticulitis, a painful condition that attacks the intestinal wall. Months of natural treatments had failed, and his condition had become so advanced he needed surgery to remove part of his intestine. But what looked like a textbook operation left him suspended between life and death.
And I woke up to a surgeon pulling a sheet off of my stomach. And as I looked down, I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. And then I looked into the surgeon's eyes, and I could see concern on his face.
He had been hemorrhaging for almost 24 hours. And they had continually given him blood, but it was hemorrhaging into his abdomen, and they didn't know it, into his stomach. It was frightening. I've never seen anyone so pale, but his lips were just completely white.
My internal clock told me that I was getting ready to die, and I only had a few seconds of consciousness left. I reached up to grab my wife. I was just wanting to tell her how much I loved her and tell her that I was getting ready to leave her.
And I went to him, and it was right after that I lost him. You know, I could tell he left. He took my hand, and then he was gone.
And my life came to my center torso, and I began to rise out of my body up into that room. Everything was going haywire down below me. They were saying, I'm going to lose him.
They were doing everything they knew to keep him alive at that point.
It looked like it was a disaster going on, but it was the sweetest day of my life. I never had any pain, and I never had any fear.
As Jeffrey's spirit hovered above his body, a light appeared.
It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It started in the center of the room toward the ceiling and began to filter out into that room, and I was immediately drawn to it. And as it began to hit objects in that room, color came flooding out like I've never seen before. My senses became enhanced. I could see everything in that room with perfect clarity. There was an entire dimension that we just simply don't see on earth. I've never been more alive than I was at that moment. It was incredible. I suddenly had an overwhelming sense of God's presence, of His love, of His peace, of His joy. The thing that was just so incredible to me is how the maker of this universe, who can make the sun, the moon, and the stars in this earth and us, can come down and hold me and comfort me and love me as if I'm the only person in the universe. And I remember thinking about the prodigal son. That's what came to mind for me, that long-lost son that had gone out and strayed, and he had come back home. And his father was coming out to hold him and to love him and to welcome him back. That's what was happening to me. It's the sweetest love there is. I told him I wanted to go with him. And then I had a fleeting thought. But what about Madeline, my wife, and what about Will? My sweet wife is just falling apart down below me, and I'd never seen her that way. And I'm up here in complete comfort, in complete peace, in complete joy. And then God told me internally I was going to go back. And I remember jolting in my bed, and I opened my eyes, and when I opened my eyes, I'm looking at the surgeon, and he's saying, I'm losing him. We've got to get him back in surgery.
Jeffrey was rushed back into surgery where doctors stopped the bleeding. When he finally regained consciousness, Jeffrey had a new understanding of God's amazing love and presence in his life.
God loves you more than you've ever known. He knows your circumstances. He knows what you're going through. I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach. I wake up with joy in my heart. I know He's with me. You can't go through something like that and not be a changed man.
He has a peace about him. He's a very peaceful and very centered. He's really not fearful of anything now.
Jeffrey's recovery was long and difficult, but the peace, joy, and love of God he found on the day he faced death is now with him in everything he does.
There's a peace and a love there like I can't describe to you. And it's an entirely different way of living. I've never enjoyed living more, and I understand now what's really important. I want to live for God, and I pray that He'll give me the opportunity to continue to do that.
Seeing eternity gave Jeffrey a new perspective for life on earth. Now he wants to live for God while he has the opportunity. The reality is that none of us know when our lives are going to end. Jim Anderson didn't. Like hundreds of thousands of people each year, Jim died of a massive heart attack. It's what happened after he died that left the hospital staff in shock.
Clear? Clear?
I felt like I was fading away. Next thing I knew, off in the distance, I saw a white light.
Jim Anderson was dying from a massive heart attack. The only signs of trouble came a year earlier, but his doctor called the symptoms stress-related. Jim was working 12-hour days as a supervisor at a wastewater treatment plant. But this time, Jim knew it was much more than stress.
I was resting in my bedroom, and all of a sudden I had a crushing pain in my chest, and the pain radiated down the arm, up the side of the neck. Couldn't catch my breath. And I called to my daughter. I said, "You're going to have to get me to the hospital. I'm not going to make it."
A balloon catheter was inserted into his artery. He was stabilized and placed on a heart transplant list. But 2 days later, Jim flatlined.
I could see everyone rushing into the room, but I couldn't hear the alarms going off. It's like I had gone underwater. The hearing had just faded away. That's when I began to pray. I knew I was dying. It wasn't a scared praying. It was earnest to take care of my family. As I prayed, it got darker to the point it went black. Next thing I knew, off in this distance, I saw a white light. It was beautiful. Just wasn't blinding, but pure, perfect. As I started to go towards the light, I could see the outer edge of it begin to spiral. And I couldn't figure out what that was, but as I got closer, I could see it was the words of prayers revolving. The words broke off, going into the light, and I followed into the light. The next thing I felt was being embraced, safe and secure. It felt wonderful. It felt like total love. Next thing I knew, I was looking down the room where my body was. I could see everyone working on me. I could hear what they were saying. There were two nurses outside of the room looking in. One said to the other, "Why are they working so hard? He's gone. If they do bring him back, he'll be a vegetable." I later on told her what she said. She about passed out. Then I thought to myself, "Where's Debbie?" And instantly I was in the room where she was.
And I'd just gotten finished with that prayer. He's yours, Lord, because I knew that was the only way he was coming back to us. If God wanted it.
When she did that,
He's yours.
I zoomed right in on her face.
He's yours.
When I saw her face, I saw every aspect of our life together. From the first day we met, our marriage, the birth of our children, all the emotions we've shared. I couldn't leave her. I just couldn't leave her. And I cried out to the Lord. I said, "Lord, I love you so much, but please let me go back." I said, "My wife needs me. My children need me so much. Please let me go back."
The doctors and nurses didn't give up. They shocked Jim so many times that the flesh on his chest was burned. Then, the doctors heard a heartbeat.
I came back to a world of pain. They shocked me so many times. It's like coming back out of the water. Just my hearing came back. I could hear them telling me, "I can't believe it, he's back, he's back." He said, "Can you hear me?" And I took that first breath on my own. Have you ever tasted honeysuckle? That's exactly what that first breath tasted like. It was so sweet, so wonderful. And I just thanked the Lord.
Jim was alive, but his heart still wasn't functioning properly.
They put him into a coma, a Medicaid coma, and to allow his body to heal. So I wasn't able to talk to him for days.
Jim spent the next 17 days in intensive care. He flatlined several more times, and each time, Jesus asked him a question.
The subsequent times that I arrested and would go towards the light, he would ask, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And each time I would ask to come back.
Jim woke up from his medical-induced coma. His heart increased in function from 5% to 30%. He no longer needed a heart transplant.
It was a long process, but basically it was good to hear his voice again. Very good to hear his voice again.
His doctor implanted a pacemaker in his chest. Just a couple of days later, Jim was able to make it home in time for his daughter's graduation. One doctor told Jim he only had a year to live. That was over 7 years ago.
It's brought us closer together, so much closer together. We talk about things now, and it's whatever needs to be done for the day, it's done. You know, we don't focus on things that are trivial.
Jim knows that every day he has with his family is a blessing from Jesus Christ.
I try to witness to at least one person a day, to let them know this isn't about me. It's about their life. And to know that He is there for them. And He loves them.
Jim described it as being embraced, feeling safe and secure. He said it felt like total love. When we come back, we're going to meet people whose experience was exactly the opposite. They'll describe how their souls were dragged out of their bodies and into a place of unimaginable torment. It's scary, but you don't want to miss it. Stay with us.
I finally got to the point where there wasn't enough cocaine and there wasn't enough alcohol.
Welcome to the 700 Club.
They started discussing between the two of them a need to pray for this guy.
Call